Sheila Dikshit came up from a freedom fighters family. He was the only child of his parents and had studied in modern school, then went to St. Stephen's, was a good, bright student, a very fine cricketer, and his parents are Brahmins. So, you know, when we fell in love, and believe it or not, he proposed to me in a DTC bus. So we, right in front of Red Fort. So yeah, I was a little taken aback, but I remember going back home, and it's the only time in my life I can remember when I was so happy that I felt really like a bird. And I could dance. There was a little room in our house where I danced, and I told my sister that, you know, I've fallen in love, and there it is. So, since my parents always encouraged us to tell them what it was, 2 days later I told my parents. I said, I've fallen in love with a boy, and he's asked me to marry him. I want to tell you about this. So they said, what does he do? I said, he's studying in the MA along with the same class that I do. How did you fall in love? I said, we played lots of noughts and crosses and went to the coffee house, and every class we were playing noughts and crosses when others was paying attention to the great teachers. So I said, we just fell in love. I don't know why or how. So they said, what does his father do? What family is he? I have no clue. He tells me sometimes that there's somebody, his father worked for the freedom struggle, but that's that. I don't know anything else. So they said that, and what are his plans? I said, his plans are probably to get a job when we finish the MA, like all other people. So you're thinking of marrying a person who hasn't got any job? How do you expect to live? I said, no, he studied in modern school, that school which I left, and he studied in St. Stephen's College. तो और कुछ नहीं तो एक चपरासी तो बनी जाएंगे कहीं. So she said, my parents said, you're really stupid. Anyway, that was that. And they thought that, you know, it's a passing phase, I might get over it. The real problem started with my in-laws, because they were, my mother-in-law especially belonged, and my great-grandmother-in-law belonged to a generation where there were no intercaste marriages. So there was a huge hullabaloo. You've taken on a girl, and she's a Miranda House girl, and she's going to be, I don't know what sort of character she's going to have. Suna wo Hindi bhi nahi bol sakti hai theek tarah se. Anyway, there was a lot of resistance. But we overcame that. It took us 3 years to overcome that. I got married, and that was that.
And your father-in-law was, can you talk a little bit about him and his family?
Yes, it was a proper district. My mother-in-law didn't take to me.
No, your father-in-law was Uma Shankar.
Uma Shankar. You want the name?
Name.
Yes, Uma Shankar Dikshit. He was one of those freedom fighters who was more in the underground movement, and he was operating from Bombay. He was but a very self-effacing and certainly a not very conscious of himself man, but a wonderful human being, a great soul, and somebody who I learned a lot from. I really learned a lot from him. So about him I feel very nostalgic. I also feel nostalgic about my mother-in-law, who adapted herself. And though it was a shock that their only son was marrying out of the caste, I think gradually, but I went through a very tough period, about 2 years, when I had to prove to them that I wasn't that kind of girl they thought I could be. I was somebody human, been brought up well, cared and shared for people, who would like to adapt herself. So what used to happen, Rameshji, was that I would have to do twice as much. I had to do all the festivals, wearing a lehenga, wearing a veil, listening to stories, doing all the pujas, and there must have been about 100 pujas in a year. Sit down, 1 hour, 2 hours, listen to all that, but giggling away and trying to amuse myself. But she made me go through it all for 2 years. When she felt that the community really had seen me and that I wasn't that kind of a person they thought I was, it was after that the whole thing relaxed, and I took off my veil and I said, I ain't going to do this. But they didn't say a thing. And especially when the children came, I think they became perfectly all right.
Can you give me the date on which you were married? I mean, what was it, so that I can have it in my...
It was the 11th of July, 1961. In Delhi, and the Bharat came. There were no women in the Bharat, and it was a Bharat which was more fond of mangoes than anything else. So my mother and my father had, because the only demand that came from them was, aam bahut sare hone chahiye. So wherever they were staying in the Bharat, on Haley Road, a friend's house was, and I got married on Firoz Shah Road, and the house which used to, but he was dead, but I think he was not there, Firoz Gandhi. So we got married there, and the most important thing was mangoes. That's about all. And the only demand they had.
And what kind of a wedding was it? Was it
traditional Indian wedding, really traditional. Both our side, my mother being a Punjabi, we had all the chuda-wuda and all the rest of it. And the evening, the pheras and all. But I must also say that my father-in-law got a pandit who was really an erudite pandit, so he did not waste too much time. It was a short wedding under the banana leaves, trees, you know, that they put there. And they were there, and the next day we were gone. We had a reception in Delhi. I went to see Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru with my father-in-law because he was very unwell at that time. And so he came, and I went to see him, gave me a big hug. I have that movie with me here. All the people, Lal Bahadur Shastri, Indira Gandhi, Zakir Hussain, all these people who was anybody, they came. But I thought I was so madly in love that the fact that my husband was around there, the rest just didn't matter.
So you got married, and it was just continue from there. About.
So after we got married, then my husband was posted in Aligarh. We stayed there. I enjoyed that enormously. It was the first time I'd gone from a big town into a small town, and discovering the little bazaars, the potters, and running a little house just belonged to my husband and me, and looking after him gave me joys and pleasures which were very different from what I'd had earlier. So it was a little world of my own, and little things mattered. What was made for dinner, what was made for breakfast, and the clothes all right, the cleaning done, this. So it was a kind of a new adventure, a new life. And because my husband and I really understood each other, it was great. Once a month, we'd come to Delhi to pick up all our strings with civilization, so we called it, and see a movie, probably go to a restaurant, for which my husband never had money. It was I who paid for it, whatever little money I had. And there it was. But simple pleasures. The Shatabdi had not quite started, but there was a train which used to come to Aligarh at about 11 in the morning and drop us here at 12 or 12:30. And then we'd come back the Sunday night, stay with my parents, take their car, roam around Delhi, see our friends, see movies, go to restaurants, and come back. And all that we desired was, if only we had 100 rupees more in the pay packet that he used to get at that time. We'd live like lords. Not that we lived badly, but our ambition was only 100 rupees. And I was very distressed when my husband told me that when an IAS officer gets married, he gets a wife allowance of 25 rupees. But if I had kept a horse, I would have got 75 rupees. I was so angry, and I think I told the collector, who was at that time a god for all of us, I told him, I said, sir, why do you have these peculiar laws and rules in your service? So my husband told me later on, he said, you don't talk to the collector like that. I said, I told him what was the truth. I said, if you'd given us 100 rupees more, we would have been able to go to Delhi much more. Then going out into the villages, partals, what were called partals, you know, when the SDMs, he was an SDM there, he was SDM Khair. And then the partals meant, you know, the winter time you spent about 10-15 days going to the land records. And we spent it in tents. And those were wonderful because those tents were really lovely. We had a little toilet to ourselves, and we had partridges which were forbidden. But we had partridges because the gaonwalas would get the partridges and cook for us. And then the partal would also be in the monsoons. And that was primarily to see that there were no floods which were foreseen, or because we had to get ready for the floods. So going to the villages, and this was really my first brush with village life, and it was really marvelous. You know, at that time, Aligarh and Bareilly subsequently, I went to villages and to women's homes. You won't believe it. They never used to comb their hair. They never used to comb their hair, and I asked them, Kangi nahi hai? He says, nahi, Kangi hame nahi milti hai. So I said, Kyun? He said, you know, we are bahus of this house, and if we were to comb our hair, they'd say, what? You're very fashionable. So they wouldn't use a comb. Then I started carrying about a dozen combs in my bag so that, you know, we could distribute it among some of these women. And also, you'd find a hodi in the center of the house which had water in it. So they'd wash the utensils in that. The water was mucky and filthy. You can't even believe what it was. And the children with matted hair, no schools anywhere. But what really, really struck me was the plight of the women. You know, when you're not in, because 20 years down the line, when we were again posted in Gorakhpur, I found women wearing what were then the Hema Malini pantsuits, if you remember that, but with the chunni, but no head covered. So the huge change took place within the next 10, 15 years or earlier. I also remember my husband and I going out. That time fertilizers were not used, and there was a huge resistance to fertilizers. So people would not use, so they used to have demonstration plots. So the Patwari would have a demonstration plot and say that if you put fertilizer, your wheat is going to be so much more. Now, they didn't accept it because they said, ye jo dawa hai, ye zameen ko kha jayegi. When they said it then, they were told to change. Today, we have come to the same cycle where we think that yes, it is going, pesticides and all, these are eating up the earth, are harmful.
When your children were born, when you were posted out?
About 3 years after I was married, I had a son and then I had a daughter 3 years later. They're stories in themselves because my son was born in Lucknow, so was my daughter. The day my son was born, it was the 15th of August. And I had a cesarean. He was born at between 7:15 or 7:40 or 8 o'clock. And Lal Bahadur Shastri was speaking on the ramparts. So my mother-in-law was thrilled because belonged to a freedom family. She said, see, we've got a child on the 15th of August, which is the birthday of India. And he's born at a time when the Prime Minister of this country is speaking from the ramparts. So that was huge celebration on that. My daughter was born 3 years later and was educated there. And then we shifted to Delhi. And thereafter it's been Delhi most of the time.